Town Hall, Clacton. I'd just like to introduce our guests. Um, Special guest is Charlie Poulter from Connect Buses. Welcome, Charlie. And I'm reliably informed that's the first time we've had a bus provider at a formal meeting. So that's a first. Welcome. And then our guests as well, ladies first, Councillor Gina Placey, Partnerships Portfolio Holder. And then left to right, John Fox, Head of Health and Partnerships. Mr. Barrett, Corporate Director, Section 151 Officer. And Gary Guyver, who's the Corporate Director and also part of a well-known pop group, which is going to perform later on in the year, I believe. So best of luck with that. And obviously, I mustn't forget our A-team of support officers who put everything together for us. Okay, so what we're going to do, I think we've got the questions and also the answers. So the idea we'll go through each answer to the questions, and if you want to ask a supplementary, you can. But if you're okay with the answers, then that'll be okay. But they will be on the website, all the questions and all the answers. So we'll go on to item 1, which is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Oxley and Councillor Thompson with no substitutions appointed. And just to note, the Associate Director for Place and Wellbeing couldn't be here tonight but he sends his apologies. Thank you.
Right, thanks. Item 2, minutes of the last meeting. Can I sign those as a true record? Okay, all those in favour of those? Yep. And item 3, declarations of interest. To declare disclosure of pecuniary interest or personal interest in the relation of any item on the agenda. Item 4, which is the questions of notice on pursuant of Council Procedure Rule 38.
We've received no such questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We're going to move the agenda around a little bit. We're going to bring item 9, which is the joint working with town and parish councils, and that's going to be first on the agenda. And it's over to Gary Guyver.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So the original purpose of the Task and Finish group was to look into how we can collaborate, work positively with town and parish councils, and the inaugural meeting of that Task and Finish group was held in November 2024, and the minutes and notes from that meeting are appended to the report. But shortly after that meeting, of course, the whole landscape around the future of local government changed quite considerably with the announcements around devolution and local government reorganisation. And therefore, a lot of the work that was proposed to be undertaken as part of this Task and Finish group, the priority very much moved to understanding what devolution and local government reorganisation might mean. And from that inaugural meeting, no further meetings have been held to date, so I'm not in a position to provide a report of the outcomes of that Task and Finish work stream. Instead, the recommendation within the report is that we actually extend the time frame for it, pick up where we left off, but do explore the opportunities of positive working with town and parish councils, albeit in the context of the changing landscape, the devolution, local government reorganisation. But it also gives us the opportunity to reflect on some of the good practice that we've seen over the last year, particularly in relation to speaking to town and parish councils, getting that feedback not only about LGR, but also about the local plan and assets going forward. And a particular note, something that has been raised by Ardley Parish Council, is how well the District Council has collaborated with them in our response to the nationally significant infrastructure projects, the pylon schemes around Norwich to Tilbury. So the recommendation, Chairman, is that we pick up where we left off, and there are actions from that inaugural meeting that we do intend to pick up on, but that we extend the time frame for the inquiry to July, and use the time to pick up the inquiry, but in the context of devolution and local government reorganisation.
Thank you for that, Gary. I think I've said before, this is quite a heavyweight report, and also, you know, what's going to happen in the future. And I think it's very important that we do liaise with the town and parish councils to prepare them for the day when a new unitary come through. We've had the recommendations. Is there any questions you'd like to ask Gary? Any members? Are we all happy with that? And then we'll. So can we agree the recommendations as printed? Yeah. Okay.
Chairman.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've passed another annual point in the scrutiny calendar, and so going forward, the membership of the Task and Finish group is currently yourself, Councillor Ferguson, and Councillor Sudra. Obviously, if there's others that want to join that going forward, then they can put themselves forward now.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Doyle.
Doyle.
Yeah.
Lovely. Any others?
Yeah, I would say, you know, if you want to think about it, and then we can, you know, we can always add in the. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much then. So that's item. Gary, you're more than welcome to stay, but if you, you know, if you do want to push off, then.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I will stay for the next item, and
okay.
I may depart early with your blessing. Thank you.
Okay, then, thanks very much. So, item 5 is over to Charlie from Connect Bus.
Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Sounds like it.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm here on behalf of the Transport Made Simple group. In October, we took over Connect Buses, formerly Headingham and Chambers, which is the biggest bus operator and the only major bus operator in tendering. We visited in October the leadership and a number of councillors, and we laid out our 3 main priorities following the takeover then. Those were principally rebuilding the trust of passengers in the business. Then it was simplifying the network and bringing that back in line with our passengers' needs. And finally, that was strengthening our partnerships with the local community, which hopefully my presence here today demonstrates that we are committed to doing. We are now the largest independent operator in the east of England, and we're hoping to leverage that position to improve our services in this area. So since we've taken over, we've seen a kind of broad improvement in operations metrics. We've seen kind of high improvements in punctuality in November compared to November of last year, a 13% improvement. I think much of the problems with reliability and punctuality with Connect Bus came about in the kind of early this year. That's when we have a lot of records of complaints coming in, and when we've heard from people who we've spoken to in the area that the issues kind of started properly. But compared to then, things have significantly improved. Similarly, reliability has seen a smaller but still steady increase, and we're operating at 98.41% of scheduled mileage at the moment, which is very solid and comparable to the rest of our network. We've achieved that by making a number of new hires, drivers. We've trained 6 new drivers in Clacton, and we've hired 4 additional drivers who already have licenses, and there's a number of trainees who are due to get their licenses in February, as well as a handful of other things such as improving our engineering timelines. So beyond that, we've started the kind of early stages of improving our network in tendering. That's been kick-started by a £2 million bus service improvement plan grant from Essex County Council. So that's funding from the Department for Transportation that's been given to Essex County Council, which Essex have chosen to solely focus on the tendering district and Harlow, or for the most part focus on tendering and Harlow, where they've identified a need for that funding for transport. So that money is going into additional services, such as the Clacton to Brightlingsea service, as well as improving existing services. So from February and March, we're going to see additional evening services to Colchester, Mistley, and on various other services. We're going to see more journeys in mornings, evenings, Saturdays, Sundays, and we're hoping that that will be a solid foundation then to start the improvements to our commercial network, rather than a network that is supported by Essex County Council money. So now that our schedulers are freed up from dealing with all of those additional services, we're going to start work on our commercial network. That's hopefully going to come into effect from Easter and the summer, although it will probably be subject to work with both the district council and the county council. The main focus is on quality of life tweaks. This was a major theme of our meeting with the council leadership both yesterday and a number of months ago that I know a couple of councillors here did attend. So things such as lining up our Clacton town services with the railway service, so that people can get on a bus and it arrives prior to the train's departure, and when a train comes in there will be a bus ideally waiting for them there to bring them on further to their final destination, as well as kind of getting basic things right, like making sure that services where they are going past, for example, Kennedy Way Medical Centre, they'll pull in and they'll stop there so that people can have direct access to public services like that. Secondly, we're hoping to introduce a year-round service that will serve the seafront, and then loop around the Frinton Road, kind of Holland-on-Sea, and make sure that those areas that are kind of currently fairly patchily served are served better. In the summer, that will be our double-deck service, and we hope that that will then subsidise in the kind of winter months, autumn, spring, a more local focus service running the same route, but with a kind of normal single decker bus to make sure that those journeys can still be made by locals who need a bus in that area. And then finally, there is something that we've partnered with Essex County Council again to offer, which is our tendering ticket. It's a new fare that's going to offer unlimited travel within the district on a £5 per day fare, which we hope will boost usage of the buses, particularly where passengers are having to interchange. So on certain journeys where, you know, a return as standard currently would be a £3 single fare and another £3 single fare to return. So where customers are making complex changes in journey, so for example, coming in from a village into Clacton and then changing onto another bus to access the hospital, it's going to significantly reduce costs there, and hopefully improve interconnectivity around the whole district. Beyond that, and kind of being a bit more vague where details haven't been figured out yet, we want to continue to review the network both before and after this, and in that process we're open to input from all councillors, both county councillors and district councillors, because we want to hear your feedback, because you represent our passengers and you will know their needs as well as we do. You will receive, you know, complaints from them, ideas from them, and we want to hear that so that our network can be representative of the people who we serve. Particularly where villages and towns across the district are growing, we want to be able to step in and ensure that their transport needs are met. Beyond that, I think, kind of as a bit of a teaser, we would like to start focusing on more interurban service for Walton on the Naze, Colchester, Harwich, Manningtree, and the kind of services within those towns themselves. We kind of identify that where those areas as being places where we could add additional service to the current network, potentially commercially, and we're still looking at the specifics of that, but that would be where we are kind of looking as a priority. So I'll get now on to areas from the previous meetings recommendations, or I was sent through a kind of package of recommendations based on transport to take a look at. So one of those items was demand responsive transport that come up in a previous meeting. This is something that we're open to. As an operator, we've got experience delivering that kind of service. We spoke yesterday with the leader of the council specifically about DRT for Harwich, where there's the new Freeport, and that's kind of a fairly central node for employment, and there are the villages surrounding, the town surrounding, and we identified that as a potential site where that could make some sense to introduce demand responsive transport, where it will be on an app or over the phone or over email, where you can contact the operator. There'll be a service running, and it would essentially be like a taxi, but it would be for a £3 bus fare and run regularly on a kind of hourly, 2-hourly, whatever it happens to be, schedule. This would require funding from either the district, the county council, or through some kind of local funding working with businesses, or crowdfunding. I think this kind of thing would take a decent amount of time, and that's time that I'm not sure if the district has, given local government reorganisation and the kind of capacity to deal with things, but it's something that we're open to, and we would be more than happy to look into if we were contacted about it. Similarly, Park and Ride, we recognise the success of the Clacton Air Show Park and Ride. That's something that we're committed to continuing running if we are asked to. We'd be open to expanding Park and Ride in other locations. It's a model of service that we've invested a lot of money in elsewhere, and is a kind of key revenue drive for us. We operate services commercially in both Chelmsford and Norwich, so without subsidy from the local authority. The only things that would be required for that kind of service is the actual parking and the land itself to be provided by whichever council or landowner controls that land. And to kind of loop that into the idea of introducing a stop at the Marks and Spencers at Brook Park West and that new development, that site could be a potential area where we could introduce Park and Ride if the landowner was open to using that parking as such. It's a fairly odd position compared to the rest of our network, in that none of our other services would conveniently be able to loop in and serve it. But if we were to introduce a new service, that would be doable, and we could potentially even extend that up to Colchester in the long term, although that would require local government or other sources of funding. We do think that there might be some Section 106 funding available from the developments in that area which could sustain the service, but I don't have details on that. But that could bring the overall bus frequency from Clacton to Colchester up to every 15 minutes as opposed to every 30. Next was socially necessary travel, which I believe is the question from Councillor Steady about designated routes. So the arrangements for designated routes, or what the government are describing as socially necessary journeys, this is something that was introduced in the Bus Services Act 2025. The local transport authority, which in this case is Essex County Council, is responsible for designating those routes. We've not heard anything from them about what the process for that may be, whether they've made any progress on it, or whether they're kind of only just starting, or whether they're waiting for further clarification from government. Nor do we actually know how this policy is going to be enforced by government, if it is up to the Transport Authority to decide what journeys they deem as socially necessary and then bind themselves to fund. If and when we hear about this, we would encourage Essex County Council to listen to both us as operators who know our passengers' travel patterns, as well as local voices such as the district council, parish councils, to gain a better understanding of what journeys are socially necessary. We do, however, believe that even in the kind of absence of the formal introduction of this legislation so far, we are committed to making sure that all of the socially necessary journeys on our network remain, they continue to be served. If not, we're improving service on those routes. We want to make sure that we can work with the district to take advantage of, for example, new developments, existing areas that have poor service that could do with better service, and we want to work proactively to ensure that those journeys are all met, because, to be honest, that's where the demand is, and therefore we want to capitalise on that demand because those are the journeys that people are making. I was also asked by Councillor Steady at a transport engagement meeting in Chelmsford, I think a month or two ago now, whether I could talk about our relationship with Essex County Council and working with Essex County Council as a transport authority. They've recently changed their portfolio holder to, I believe, a tendering district county councillor, Mark Platt. So we thought best to leave that for a kind of future engagement where we can discuss that further. But as a kind of broad point, we would recommend that the district work more directly with us as an operator as opposed to going through the county council, because that offers the most flexibility for us and for yourselves, because Essex County Council are bound by a number of transport policies. Their procurement team, unlike other transport authorities, their procurement team is directly responsible for procuring transport, which means things tend to be a lot less flexible than where it's the transport team itself doing the procurement on the advice of the procurement team. So we think a more direct relationship would make more sense in terms of maximising our flexibility and the speed at which we can deliver service. Of course, the only exception to that is where Essex County Council funding is involved. We're going to introduce ourselves soon to the new County Council transport teams as well as to the new combined authority. This was something that we spoke about yesterday with the leader of the council. We met with him yesterday morning. And this is these are things that we're keen to get started on. And we'll make sure that everyone on the council is updated as to the kind of nature of our relationship with the county council and with the new combined authority. And we will kind of keep you updated on what our work with them looks like, whether we can have any assistance from the district on our work with them, or whether there's anything that we can feed back from the county council and the combined authority to the district, because we want to see all of these entities, as kind of confusing as it is currently going through local government reorganisation, working together to deliver the best service that we can for the area. So that's all I have. I'm happy to open up to questions from anyone about anything more specific.
So it's a very comprehensive presentation. That was really good. Well done. I'd like to bring in, just fortuitous really, so we've got Gary, who's the planning and community, and also we've got Richard, who's the Section 151 officer, and he's the finance guru, and then obviously we've got Councillor Placey, which is the portfolio holder for partnerships. So Gary, I don't know whether you got a few.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Charlie. I thought that was really, really good, very informative, and comes at quite a useful time for the district as well, because not only do we have devolution and LGR, we need to be thinking about and making those connections with the right people in the run up to that, but we are also in the process of developing our plan for growth for the future as well. So it's an opportune time to meet you, because I think there will be an opportunity where we can have a good discussion about how the plans weave with what we're looking to do here at tendering. So a few questions about what plans are afoot, what strategy is in place. Obviously there's sort of government funding, but government funding is never guaranteed indefinitely into the future. Is there any thoughts about how the improved services could be sustained on a commercial basis in the longer term, after that funding perhaps isn't there?
Yeah, so as it stands, this funding is coming through from Essex. I believe for the next 3 years, the government has guaranteed a long-term settlement for transport funding, which has been fairly revolutionary for the industry. Typically, it's funded on a 1-year timeline, but I believe it was kind of end of last year, early this year, that they've announced that it's going to come through for 3 years. So that's something that we're very happy about. In terms of long-term funding on these services, we would expect demand as these services are introduced to increase. Obviously, I can't make any guarantees that when funding dries up, these services will continue, but equally, we would like to continue them, and if the money is there, then we will be able to. That would always be our plan. I believe that should answer everything you asked.
If you don't mind, sorry.
Sorry.
Thank you, Charlie. That was great. And in terms of some of the priorities around tendering, what you'll find when we have our discussions is skills is a big issue for the district, and for people to be able to access the educational institutes that provide the kind of training that we're going to need for the economy of the area, specifically thinking about how people can get to places like Colchester Institute for vocational training. Very difficult, particularly for young people that can't afford the private transport. Having an efficient public transport network that gets them there is very important. So I just put that on your radar as something that I think is going to be a priority for our district going forward, and invite any comments on that. But I welcome the opportunity to speak to you about the emerging local plan and how the pattern for growth needs to be thought of in the context of how you get people onto public transport, because I think it's going to be a key priority for us going forward.
So I'll just comment on the kind of focus there on transport to access skills, education. Specifically, you mentioned the Colchester Institute. This is a question that I've received before from a number of councillors. It's something that we're looking into. It's something that we couldn't run commercially. However, if funding was made available, it's definitely something that we would look into. We absolutely agree with the need for transport to access education. I think that will be a key area where we can work together as an operator and a district, rather than with the county council, which is more focused on local bus. But as it stands, we don't have any plans to introduce that kind of new service, but it's something we're absolutely open to.
I think it's more relevant to Gary. I've got nothing to raise at this point. Yeah. Thank you though for the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm quite pleased that a lot of points that concerned me and my residents have been included. And John's just given me some notes. Oh yeah. The health centres, I mean, and that is great that you're actually going to stop off at Kennedy Way. That's something that's been a bone of contention for ages, isn't it? And I think you've more or less covered it, and what Gary said as well, that people, every meeting I go to, transport is an issue. Need to get to work, need to get to education, need to get to health appointments, need to get the shopping without having to walk for miles when they get off the bus. So this for me is the start of something exciting, I think, and I'm looking forward to us working together to make things better. Thank you.
Some questions. My own view is I think that Charlie has sort of covered that in the presentation, and then obviously we've had the supplementary from Gary and obviously Gina and that. But Carrie would like to.
And it's sort of building on what Gary was talking about, the access to education. I'm really pleased you mentioned Kennedy Way Medical Centre, because that is something I'm councillor for Holland-on-Sea, so that comes up quite a lot, and I'm really pleased that that's something you're working on. But what is coming to me more and more is the issue of children being able to get to St Benedict's in Colchester. And apparently for the children whose parents can afford the fares, they were going to St Osyth's and getting transport from there. However, I was informed last week that that bus has stopped. I've actually just checked how you would get to St Benedict's from here, and there's a seaside route bus that takes you to Colchester, but it doesn't run during school hours. It's a bit ridiculous. So I just wonder, Charlie, whether or not that's something that you could take away and maybe have a look at for us.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'll note that and get back to you.
Do any other member want to make a supplementary? We've got some questions in, but I think basically it's been covered by the presentation. Terry?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Charlotte. It's really detailed. It's good. Your bus arrival times are improving, but I think the best you got is about 75%, which, you know, I'm not maths, but so a quarter of your buses are still running late. What figure are you working towards where you'll be comfortable and happy that your bus service is as good as it'll ever be?
I don't think there is a particular number that we're working to. To be honest, now it's just a case of making steady improvements and ensuring that those improvements keep coming in month on month. As it stands, where it is around kind of 75%, it's not atypical for an operator in this kind of geography. Obviously, we do want it to be better, and it is going to get better. But it's not as bad as it sounds, I suppose, because 75% is everything running on time to the minute. The 25% does include stuff kind of 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes late. So with a bit of leeway, it's not quite as indicative, the exact number, but you'll see it continue to improve.
Just one extra question with devolution and the new county combined authority of Greater Essex. Where does that come into your planning? With obviously you've got the unitary, and then we're going to have the Greater Essex authority as well.
Yep, so we're, in terms of when the unitaries come in, we imagine that there will be a number of councillors who may transfer up from the district and the county level to the unitary level, and we're committed to maintaining those relationships as well as welcoming the new councillors and continuing work with the unitaries, even though those unitaries won't be the transport authorities. That kind of local knowledge is still critical to building a network that works for our passengers. In terms of the combined authority, as it stands, as far as I'm aware, even though the mayoral elections have been pushed back, the combined county authority is still going to come in place and still have a budget of around £14 million, I think, a year. And we are going to introduce ourselves to the chief executive of the combined authority. We want to work with them to try and meet transport needs for both Tendring and the rest of Essex. And of course, when elections do take place to elect a mayor, that mayor will be transferred the transport authority powers that Essex County Council currently have, and therefore we will be moving from working with ECC to working with them, and that's a relationship that we're looking forward to developing, and is a kind of work in progress elsewhere where devolution is moving ahead, such as Cambridge and Peterborough, where they're currently moving towards franchising.
It was a really good presentation, Charlie. And could we have a copy of your presentation? You already got it, yeah. So that would be great. And obviously we can share that with town and parish councils. Is that okay for everything? Yeah. So I think obviously, as you said, we met here with the leader, I think, wasn't it, and a couple of others, and then we met again in Chelmsford, and there was some sort of things we can get involved with there, with like bus shelters and sort of the electronic signs as well. So maybe I could probably catch up with you after, Gina, and see what we can come up with on that as well. So yeah, well, that's great. Thanks very much. You're more than welcome to stay, but I know that you've. Are you going back to Lincolnshire tonight? No. Sorry. Oh, okay. Okay. So, so yeah, so you're quite welcome to stay, but understand if you want to push off. And but thanks very much. Very impressive. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We're now going to move on to item 6, which is the grant funding. Mr. Fox.
Hopefully the presentation will show itself shortly.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks. Yeah, okay. We're just pausing for a changeover of laptop for the presentations. So once we've done that, we'll crack on. We're back and running.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you. I've got a short presentation here about external funding. I was just going to run through first, and then if you have any questions, please do follow up. So I firstly wanted to talk about where we get some of our funding from, or how, if we're allocating funding, how that's driven. So firstly, we do get a significant amount, or we've historically got a significant amount of funding from partners, which has been, for example, our health partners in the past have given us money. Actually, a significant amount of funding that comes from government, or has over a period of time. But also, we do funding from our own resources as well. So where we want to focus on something that's important to us, we have allocated funding previously. And I've just given a couple of examples across the spectrum there. So the shared prosperity funding, that's funding that comes down from government, and we have had for a little while now, but actually isn't going to be repeated next year. On an annual basis, we get some money from our public health colleagues at Essex County Council, who are keen for us to deliver public health locally. The Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner allocates money essentially to a community safety partnership which sits underneath the council to allocate to specific projects in our area, which the Community Safety Partnership Group come together to determine. And then there's also, we have some specific projects as well, so things that we as a council are thinking, actually we particularly want to invest in that. For example, we fund the mental health hub, and also we have an advice and guidance service provided by Citizens Advice Tendering. So just in terms of where we allocate, it's a very significant allocation to a community and voluntary sector, and it's about how we're supporting our communities. But also there is allocation to businesses as well, because they are fundamental in terms of supporting our communities as well, either by the activities they undertake or by the employment they offer. And as I mentioned earlier, those core council projects, things we are interested in and meet our corporate priorities, which we fund directly. Funding varies depending on the funding we've been given, and actually varies from year to year as well, and how much we have got available in the budget to allocate it to it. And significantly, I think funding is decreasing at the moment, both from what the council has to allocate, but also our partners. Where we've received some significant funding in the past, that is not going to happen in the imminent future, so we need to be aware of that. As part of that, and leading out of a cabinet report towards the end of 2024, where there was a high-level framework for how we allocate funding, we want to try and get some consistency, and to do that, it's about bringing how we draft up an external funding policy. So I've been in the process of starting to try to pull that together, which, as I say, gives us consistency and comes out of that previous cabinet report. That original cabinet report highlighted a flow chart of how to allocate funding and a couple of tables or checklists for when we receive funding and when we allocate funding. This proposed external funding policy is trying to build on that. So what we wanted to do was have those checklists and run those for a period of time to make sure that where funding's been allocated across the council, it works and works well, and then build an external funding policy on that. So the rest of the slides in the presentation are the sort of things that I think are going to be in that draft policy, or what's coming together about how we want to focus around funding, to give you an idea of the concepts we think are important to have in an external funding policy. So in terms of acceptance of funding, critically, we only want to accept funding which is going to meet our corporate plan. So there's something about just because somebody wants to offer us money doesn't mean we want to take it. So, you know, what are our council priorities, and making sure that any funding that is given to us is in line with those council priorities. And in addition, that funding is likely to come with a set of criteria about how we can allocate that and use it. So we need to make sure we align with that and we're happy with those conditions. I think there's also something really important about the capacity to utilise that funding as well, because the sort of more requirements you put on using funding, that's going to take up lots of time to do that. And also there's a sort of behind the scenes, how we sort the governance out as well. So it's being mindful that if we are offered funding, we actually have the capability not only to actually use the funding itself, but we have the processes and the capacity to actually make use of that. And then in terms of funding as well, and this is going to come up repeatedly, it does need to meet the subsidy control requirements, which is a piece of legislation that came in a couple of years ago to make sure that funding is allocated fairly and appropriately, and it will apply to a funder giving money to us, and it will apply to us as we give funding to someone else. I think it's going to be important in any proposed policy to make sure we set out a list of general principles, critically, which I've just mentioned, about how if we're going to allocate the funding now. So I've just talked about us receiving it, but how we allocate it on, it absolutely aligns with corporate priorities and our governance processes, about meeting those external conditions of the funder. I think then we've got to be really clear about the criteria we are going to use through that funding process. So if we're giving funding to somebody, having real clarity about what we're trying to achieve from that funding for our purposes, but also for the person who's a recipient of the funding as well, so they know what they're trying to deliver. Another really important general principle is around making sure that's spent as on that approved purpose. So what we've suggested the funding should be spent on, using that criteria-based approach, but actually that is how it's spent. And that comes into that last point about monitoring and evaluation. So one of those general principles needs to be that when we're allocating funding, there is monitoring and us evaluating the person delivering. And that when we're awarding funding, that award is on merit. There's in the funding proposed document, there's a number of other principles I'm thinking about as well. And that would include wider things about making sure there's access of opportunity as well. So when we're allocating funding, that people or different organisations do have access to apply for that. In terms of the application now, I think there needs to be something around the application forms and the criteria we're putting on those are clear and easy to understand. So people who are reading those documents or wanting to apply can apply for that. And you don't need specialist knowledge to do so, because we don't always want specialist people to do things. There's some really great people out in our community who may not be the best at filling out application forms. And how do we make sure that they get equality of opportunity as those people who are more professional at it? The importance of timeliness as well, so that that whole process we're going through runs through at a sensible speed. So it's not rushed through, but it's also not an extended long period, so people know how long the application process will take, when we're going to make decisions and when we're going to get back to them. In terms of when we're asking people to apply, it's important, I think, we put something around the context as well. So the purpose of what we're trying to achieve with that funding, so the criteria, and what conditions are going to be set with that, and any deadlines in terms of timing, that we're really clear about the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and that they will need to be able to demonstrate they're going to deliver those outcomes. And again, monitoring and evaluation, that will come up again and again. And also, we talk about eligible costs, so people know what they can apply for, because some things we will happily fund, and other things you think that is not the sort of thing we're going to fund. So we want to make sure they're aware of what they are as well. So when they put their application in, they are aware they're applying for something that we are interested and are going to respond to. I did talk about equality of access. I think that's really, really important, both across the size of organisation or who's trying to apply for that, and also geographically across our area as well. So it's about how we make sure that eligible organisations are given that opportunity. And that includes how we set up our application forms, but also how we publicise that as well, in terms of whether it's on our website, or how we share that with partners, or even the opportunity to share that with members who can pass that out to relevant organisations in their wards. Really clear about we must promote those opportunities, so it is actual active promotion of that, so organisations are aware of it. As I mentioned earlier, about having accessible application forms. And I think there's also something important about, where necessary, trying to provide officer support or partner support to some of those organisations to help them fill in those applications or support them in that process. So if they're struggling to do that, that's not what they usually do. We support them where we can to make sure they can make effective applications. Just moving on from applications now to us assessing what comes back in. So again, really important, it's got to meet. When someone's filled an application form, when we're reading through it, we absolutely need to make sure it's meeting the corporate plan requirements. It's meeting what the criteria we have asked for to be met. I think it's really important that organisations identify how they're going to spend that money. So what we wouldn't want to see in an application is, here's my application for the whole of the sum, and I'm not telling you how I'm spending it. Actually, we're going to need a breakdown of that spend, so we understand if that's going to be effective. I think organisations also need to identify how they're going to monitor. So we need them to monitor themselves and then provide that information to us so we can start evaluating the success of that. So how they are going to deliver their monitoring to us. And also, in terms of assessing, that we do enough due diligence. So that will be around a number of areas, some of which I've mentioned here. So about, do they have a bank? What their bank details are? Are they appropriately insured for this? What their legal compliance is? Do they have safeguarding if necessary? And also something about previous grants that they've received as well. The actual agreement, because that will then lead on to us having an agreement with the organisation, and actually within that agreement, I say there is some, you can see some similarities as this goes through, that it's clear in the agreement what the criteria are. So the person who's receiving the funding and wants to deliver on that knows what they are, what we're expecting of them, and what we expect to see. There needs to be some really clear terms and conditions as well. And I mentioned earlier about clarity and accessibility. It's about making sure those terms and conditions are clear for recipients of funding so they know what they're delivering against. We want something in our funding agreement to determine what the outcome is we're seeking to achieve, so they know what they're being held to. Also around the timescale as well, because we want to do this over a set timescale, so we should be giving them some information to say how long that's going to take or how long they have. And just in terms of that monitoring, that we will be monitoring and evaluating, but also something in there that if they don't meet those requirements, there's the opportunity to claw some of that funding back. When we're actually going to allocate funding, so we're now moving to, we are going to provide you this funding agreement, how we're going to do this. It's critically important that it's supported by a decision. Those decisions are at an executive level, so the funding we're doing at the moment, allocating at the moment, is supported by an executive decision. That we are going to do monitoring and evaluation of what they're doing, and something about those clawback arrangements if they fail to perform. But I think also in that allocation and review period, actually being mindful that if we are going to require repayment, if things start to appear around, have they provided misleading information, or are they acting in a way that is detrimental to the council, or if we identify fraud. So there's the opportunity to claw back money like that. And this is the final slide. And this is just to sum up that actually this proposed external funding policy, it is directed at grant funding, but also accepts that there's contracts for services as well. So there is other ways we allocate money. Some of those contracts are very significant contracts and would potentially fall outside this, but there are other forms of funding we give. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, we give some money to citizens' advice around an advice and guidance service. That's a contract for services as opposed to a grant agreement, and that would be covered by this as well. And then finally, just coming back to, we'll always make sure that both for grant funding and contracts for services, that we're meeting subsidy control. So what I've tried to highlight there is around the proposed and developing external funding policy, the types of things that I would expect to come through on that. That policy is then going to be approved by the leader of the council, which is part of that original cabinet decision which occurred back in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was a really good, another sort of very informative presentation. I must admit, when this first came before us, probably over a year ago, 18 months ago, before Cabinet took over, I think the concern which was raised was the actual control, but that certainly seems to have been rectified now. So, yeah, it was really congratulations on covering those. I must admit, we did have a few concerns about it. So, but as I say, you've done that. And you've put clauses in place. So, Chris.
John, it's quite a comprehensive report in regard to grants, but one of the things I was surprised wasn't in there was progression planning, because we have all the checks and balances, obviously, while TDC is in existence, but as we move towards local government reorganisation and unitary authority, I'm assuming that some of these grants will still be going in 2 or 3 years' time. The monitoring and the criteria could be changing. You're potentially looking at a different political setup with a unitary and a mayoral system. So, one, how are we ensuring that the monitoring and the evaluation is continuing over the new local government setup? And two, in the event of the new regime coming in 2 years' time, having a different set of policy criteria, how are we ensuring that the people that are getting the grants are protected? Because it's easier when you're a small authority and you're setting the grants, but in 3 years' time it could be somebody else who wasn't part of this authority, looking at a grant that we've set up on a historical basis. I'm just a little bit worried that we don't have any progression planning within the policy that you've outlaid, and that we don't seem to be putting anything in which might be able to protect applicants if you in the future, if you get officers from a new authority looking at the existing grants that we've set up.
Thank you. I think my thoughts on that would be, I think there's something about us binding that new authority which we can't do. So we need to be mindful of that. But then more importantly, I think what this is about is saying that these are the grants we want to put forward and here's the criteria, and having an agreement. So we have got a written document between us, which is agreed by both of us, about what we expect to be delivered over what timescale. And although I think it's difficult then to say the new authority, and that's not a legal contract, that's difficult to say that a new authority must take those on, but actually the mere fact we've got an agreement. And I think in general, most of our grant funding tends to be relatively short term. So for example, just going back to that comment about citizens' advice and their advice and guidance contract, that is a contract, and that runs over a period of time and runs into the new unitary arrangement, but actually it's a contract between us, so there's legal standing to that. With those grant agreements, I don't think there will be such a legal standing, but there will be a document between us agreeing that. So there is something that gives some strength to that agreement, so that any organisation can rely on that. I think the interesting point, actually, reflecting what you say, is as we get closer and closer to that date, how's that going to work? So I will reflect on that, about how we're going to cover that off, because we could be allocating grants 6 months before the new authority comes into place, and just how that's going to be covered. And I will think about that.
Just as a point, I mean, one of the things that we mentioned was our mental health partnerships. Now, to me, those sort of strategic type partnerships, if your people are relying on that funding, then surely needs to be some sort of safeguard that as we move forward, those organisations that we're funding at the moment for those type of activities, you know, important social activities, are protected and ring-fenced. And I think there needs to be something in there that says, you know, if you are doing work, for example, in mental health, and you do have a client base, that the funding in some way is ring-fenced or in some way protected. Because I would hate to think on the first day of the new sort of unitary taking over, that numerous tendering groups find that, you know, their money's not there.
I think there is, yeah, I absolutely take your point there. And I think there is something around how we transition from our existing organisation to a new organisation, and during that process make sure those discussions are happening, so that there is a smoother changeover, as opposed to going from one organisation to a new one, that we do have a transition period where we start talking about those particular things. And certainly mental health is a really great example of how we'd want to get consistency there.
Would it be possible to put that as a part of the policy, sort of a transitional period, that when you put that policy to the cabinet, at least they're aware potentially that there could be, I won't say issues, but there are concerns on those areas. Not that I'm trying to sort of ruin your policy, but I do think that it would be important to try and protect local residents, local groups, and for progression.
Yeah, just coming in on that, we could actually put a recommendation in that is included in the policy. Is that?
You can put a recommendation forward. Whether we can take that forward is a different question, because I think there's two issues. One, as John said, you can't bind new authority. They can cease a scheme from day one. What we, it's not in here as in the previous report, is there are notice periods. If there's an organisation that's expecting funding, there is notice periods. You have to give that. It was a bit like the similar one with the discussion before. So you have to give it. So they're protected, not through TDC's rules, but are protected by regulation and guidance. So you would have to give a notice period if there was an organisation that's got an expectation of relying on funding from a local authority. So in that sense, the shadow board that comes into being before the 1st of April 2028 would be having to make those decisions. Someone's got to give notice period if they're not going to continue. If they don't give notice period, then there's protection there anyway. If you don't give that, it's got to carry on until notice period is provided. So lots of decisions have got to be made, but they would be expected to be made in that sort of second half of 2028 when the as a shadow board starts to look at, and that council will also have a Section 141 officer and other officers as well who've got obligation for that new unitary council. So I don't think there's anything we can put in our policy because you can't bind the new authority, but I think we've got to recognise that those organisations are protected by regulations already.
Something into the actual policy then, so it's in there, even if it's not trying to bind them, but a recognition that we need to have these clauses in place. And if maybe we take that at the end of your policy document. So we're not asking them, we're just asking for recognition that something along the lines that Richard suggested could be put in place. And I won't attempt to try to say that because it was too long. I didn't quite understand all of it, but I do think that if we could have something along those lines, that would be helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
That's absolutely fine, and we'll obviously explore that. So yeah, yeah.
It's down to, obviously, as you say, as we move on, it's down to other people to take on.
That sounds reasonable.
Okay, we've got some other questions. Does anybody want to ask a supplementary? Because we've got the answers and we've got the we've got the questions and we've got the answers. Is there any supplementary questions there? Yeah, Carrie.
Sorry, John, it's just one very, very brief question. So in your report, it says that there's a timeline for adoption of the policy. Are we on target to meet that timeline?
Yes, we're proposing to get that policy adopted in March. So yeah, we are on that timeline at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you.
Terry, did you want?
Right. Yeah, it's to me it sounds like a really comprehensive policy, one with teeth but also with heart, if that makes sense. So what I particularly liked was the view that everybody's application is considered, because there's a great fear when people fill in a grant form, whether it be at a parish council level or district council. And that idea that we can also offer help is brilliant. My only fear with that is implementing it to make sure that a glossy professional application for a grant is always on paper going to look better. It's taken the time to look a bit deeper at the genuine comments that might be a bit rough around the edges. So this kind of implementation with that is my only worry with that, but the principle is brilliant.
It's probably to add around the assurance as well that you were looking for, and I think it's worth sort of mentioning that there's two things, but there was three things I was going to mention. Two around the governance side is around the Cabinet asked Audit Committee to review the policy as well. So Audit Committee have got their involvement. It's captured in there. The annual governance statement. But I said also, as well as I'd certainly be asking our head of internal audit to look at the policy. In reality, John will probably ask them to be involved on a consultative basis anyway. So you'd have the internal audit service reviewing that, picking up all the points that John covered in terms of those control mechanisms. So that hopefully gives you assurance that the input into it. But I think it's also expectations in terms from a financial budgetary perspective. There's not a lot of grant funding. I think that's in your response there is just trying to manage expectations. There's not a lot of grant funding available as we go forward into 6, 7 and 7, 8. I think we've had that period where there's quite a lot of schemes that we were operating. I think we are seeing those reduce significantly, and I think there'll be sort of very limited opportunities going forward.
Just out of a matter of interest, and might be a good idea, as somebody that's got a grant externally, but not obviously not with us, monitoring reports. What does a monitoring report even look like? And if I struggle with that, then I'm sure people that would get grants from us would equally struggle. And I just wondered whether within the policy, maybe as an appendices, you could give an example or just some headlines, what you would want them to, you know, and obviously they've got their own outputs, but how you want to see an evaluation report or an end of project report. Because I struggle with that.
I think it's going to be difficult to give an example because of different levels of grant funding. So what you would expect for a bigger amount of grant funding will be much more significant than a smaller amount. But I think there may well be something where I could put some detail in that monitoring section that says the sort of things you'd be expected to cover, which would then allow an organisation to sort of like pick through those and think, oh, I'm actually quite a small organisation. I'm not bidding for much money here. I need to do a few of these, whereas a bigger organisation would do much more. So I'll endeavour to put something in around that.
Just a question for Councillor Placey, Gina. On the 31st of January 2025, Cabinet received 5 recommendations from this committee in respect of the development of the grant giving policy, and it proved your response to consider that these 5 items would be included in the policy, or in proposing to be included in the policy. Can you give us a written response to the extent to which those items have been incorporated?
The answers?
Not that I can. If you can point me in the right direction.
So there is one of the answers I've listed there.
List it all out.
I've listed in one of the answers where the question says, could you please provide an update on delivery against the recommendations? In the answer section, in the italics, is what the committee raised last time, and then there's in non-italic, there's the answer to those questions.
Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I noticed on the report that we seem to have everything organised going forward, but I notice external funding is likely to reduce very significantly. Are there, or has anybody given any thought, because we're going into, what shall we say, murky territory, as to what would happen as we go forward if we haven't got insufficient funding? Presumably we are not in a position to back up the loss of funding from the government totally from district council funds. So, you know, has anybody given any thought to, what shall we say, what happens if the money runs out?
I mean, essentially, we have to deal with the funding we have the opportunity to access. And for example, our health partners have given us very significant funding in the past, which they're not doing at the moment because their position has changed as well. And we're going to need to manage that the best way we can going forwards. And certainly I'm aware that the wider system, where I talk with our health partners, and that's on the broadest possible sense, all organisations and how they are trying to support and address health and well-being. There is a lack of funding at the moment, and there's a real understanding that's going to be really challenging for our areas. Some of the things that us, and I hope to have this in the policy as well, and our partners reflect on sustainability of any activity that's being undertaken. So how do organisations do something which has a bit of a legacy, a lasting effect? Because you are right, we are approaching a period where there is a lack of funding, I think both for the council itself to allocate from its own resources, but also from when we received external funding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Probably a question for Richard. Any residue of the grant, the monies in the grant policy, or in the pot for grants, come the day with LGR, if there is any monies left over, what would be the plan? Could it be reallocated within that area, or would it go to another, or would it be put into like the general reserve fund?
My expectation would be there would be no TDC scheme. It would be a scheme that's been funded, like John said, about funding from another body. So we'd be beholden to their rules. I can't see us having our own local scheme. It's not in the current plan. So yeah, we would go back to the grant giver to us. What conditions do they impose on us as a recipient, and that's dependent on who the grant giver is and the relevant scheme over the next couple of years.
Okay with the answers and the supplementaries? Okay. Thanks very much, John. That was a real good presentation, very informative. Yeah, and Gina. So you're more than welcome to stay, but if you'd like to take an early leave, then you can do so. Well, I'll give you a ring, and we'll. Richard, did you want to take on item 7?
Just push a button. Yeah, it was just to say I think it was an opportunity. I was speaking to the chief executive about item 7, and I know the chap from the ICB can't attend tonight, and I think we're talking about February, your February meeting. So it's just a conversation. I think it's an opportunity that we can see if we can get something. You're getting an update from the ICB. It was a case of an opportunity from TDC's perspective as well on local health issues. So it's an opportunity for us to consider bringing some information from a TDC perspective to that meeting as well. So that's the attempt to do so to your next meeting. So you got your ICB and our local input to that to your next meeting. So that was a plan if that's acceptable to the committee.
I think, Chairman, the easiest thing is for you to get some further information about what that might include, because I think your March meeting was intended to look, again, at LGR matters. And so I think it's just whether you retain your March meeting looking at that, or bring it forward to the September one, because you've got Carnarvon Terrace on the February one. So
yep.
There's a risk that it may just become too large. So I think if you can if we can have that conversation, before too long, then further details can be obtained and decision made.
Yeah, it's an opportunity, isn't it? And I think, as you say, it's a good discussion to see what we can do for February.
Yeah. Okay, that's great.
Just to obviously record for the purposes that the intention was that Tom Abel would be attending today and talking about the new integrated care board for Greater Essex. Unfortunately, Tom is unable to attend this evening, but has said that he'll attend the next meeting, the special meeting, on the 10th of February. So the questions and the approach has already been shared with him, and that will be carried forward to the 10th of February, if everybody's okay with that.
Thank you, Chair. So really the importance or the starting point for this task and finish group was really the importance of youth activities and provision outside of school. And once youngsters leave school and then go into, whether it be sports or youth clubs, etc. The mental health improves. You know, it's a good experience, and they're less likely to get involved in antisocial behaviour. We discussed that there was a public perception out there that these kind of youth clubs, etc., don't exist, so they've gone or they're finished. And the big problem was, how do we signpost what we discovered when we discussed what was going on in our wards? Actually, lots of things were going on. There were lots of clubs and lots of activities. The problem we faced was, were they advertised and were they signpost enough? And the Task and Finish group felt that the answer to that was absolutely no. So you can see that there are 3 recommendations here. The first one is to provide a platform, an icon, an app, call it what you will, so that young people, parents could access exactly what activities are going on in their local areas, whether they move into the area, whether they're already into the area. There already exists an Active Essex or Find Your Active database. I think it's fair to say at the moment it's a bit underused. So instead of recreating something new, this recommendation, number 2, is to use that and to populate it with all the things from our wards that goes on that children could get involved in. And you can see that recommendation number 3 is that once we've populated that database, that we promote it through the Active Tendering website. That they are the 3 recommendations. It's really simple. It's to make sure we're signposting the opportunities that exist already out there to young people at what looks like a very sensible cost. So those are the 3 recommendations.
Have we considered in places like our leisure centres having a board up there where local groups can advertise their activities for free? Because it does strike me that if you go, for example, Clacton Leisure Centre or Walton Leisure Centre, where you're getting quite a number of sort of youngsters through there, and parents and people of various ages, that if you had a community notice board up on the wall somewhere where groups could advertise, that might be helpful.
We did early on in the discussions cover that, but we then really focused on what most young people use, which is kind of apps or icons. But you are certainly right that stuff like that for parents and for kids that go in there is good. The great thing with this is you can be anywhere in our district and look at it, or actually anywhere across Essex, look it up and there it is. So it's more powerful than a board, but a board serves a purpose as well. Yeah.
I just wonder whether you'd consider, when you've got it up and running, maybe putting it into Frontline. Because Frontline obviously is a resource that everybody can use. If a child is lonely or isolated, you can go onto Frontline and see what's going on across Essex actually. But it might be an idea to look into that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
I can give you the contact.
Well, again, I think it's been a really useful report and Task and Finish group, Jerry. So congratulations on bringing that forward, and hopefully that will help our younger people in the district to be able to participate and with the facilities. So thank you very much, and that's really good. Okay, we're just going to have a comfort break for 5 minutes, and then we'll be back. Okay. Now we move to recommendations. Mr. Simmons.
Yes, Chairman, in relation to two of the items, you still needed to approve recommendations you have for a number of the other items. But the first one was item 5 in relation to the Connect bus presentation that you received. I think the recommendations are as follows: that you want to thank Charlie Porter on behalf of Connect Bus for his presentation and welcome the commitment to ongoing dialogue with the Council and other partners in relation to possible improvements to the bus network. To welcome the improvements reported on punctuality of buses and looks forward to these improvements being maintained and built upon. That you want to urge Cabinet to press Connect Bus for solutions to ensure that bus services between centres such as Harwich, Walton and Clacton to and from Colchester include the Colchester Institute site to facilitate skills development for those with limited ability to otherwise access the Institute from tendering, and in addition to look to improve bus access to school sites generally across the district, and to re-emphasise the desirability of prioritising gaining developer contributions for new bus routes in the delivery of the revised local plan, and that will be also a recommendation through to Cabinet. If that's the recommendations that the committee wants to pursue, they will need to be proposed, seconded and then voted upon, Chairman.
Unanimous. Yep.
The second item was item 6, which was grant funding. And here I think the recommendations, Chairman, were to thank the portfolio holder, the Corporate Director for Finance and IT, and the Head of Health and Partnerships for their update on the development of a grant-giving policy for the Council. That you want to reaffirm to Cabinet that the recommendations that you originally made at your meeting on the 14th of January 2025 in respect of the grant-giving policy of the Council, and ask that there is reconsideration of those items not yet pursued as set out in the answers to your questions. And 3, that the Cabinet or portfolio holder, as relevant, be urged to include in the policy some text to alert the intended shadow authority and the successor unitary authority that will cover tendering to ensure that there is protection of community groups in the district and their access to funding, and that communication with those groups ahead of reorganisation be pursued to ensure they are best prepared for that change. Chairman.
Chris, would you like to move? And Bill would like to second. All those in favour? Pass. And that concludes tonight's meeting. Thanks everybody for their participation. Just to confuse us, isn't it? Thanks very much, and we'll see you in February. 10th of February for the next exciting instalment. Thank you very much.